On Friday the 7th of March, just last month, 19-year-old twin brothers Qaadir and Naazir Lewis were last seen leaving their home in Lawrenceville, Georgia, as they had been planning to fly out to Boston for a trip. However, in a shocking twist, the following day their lifeless bodies would be discovered 90 miles away on Bell Mountain in the small town of Hiawassee, both suffering from fatal gunshot wounds. Authorities were quick to suggest that one of the brothers was responsible for their deaths, but after hearing this theory, their family immediately pushed back, insisting that the inseparable twins had no history of violence and no reason to be in the remote mountain region. So, determined to uncover the truth, the investigation continued, and soon enough, another shocking detail would emerge, after a volunteer firefighter was arrested for leaking crime scene photos, casting doubt on the handling of the case and raising suspicion that some kind of cover-up was being played out. However, after almost 1 full month of investigating in the town of Hiawassee, the case still remains unsolved, leaving the family understandably distraught as they are only left to wonder, what really happened to Qaadir and Naazir Lewis? And could their deaths have been the result of racial discrimination? Qaadir Malik Lewis and Naazir Rahim Lewis were born on the 5th of April in 2005, where they were raised in Lawrenceville, Georgia by their loving family. And as identical twins, they shared an unbreakable bond, one that had been evident since birth. Not much else is publicly known about their early childhood, but what we do know is that Qaadir and Naazir were described as kind, ambitious, and deeply connected to their family. They were raised in a supportive and faith-driven household where they were instilled with values of hard work, loyalty, and determination. Growing up, the brothers had distinct personalities but were inseparable nonetheless. Family and friends recall them always being together, whether it was playing sports, exploring new interests, or simply spending time with loved ones. But despite the few differences they did have, one thing remained clear. Qaadir and Naazir were always each other's greatest supporters. As they entered adulthood, it was clear that the twins were focused on building their futures by pursuing their passions through higher education. Naazir was enrolled in the Automotive Technology program at Gwinnett Technical College, aiming to build a career in automotive engineering, whilst Qaadir attended the Aviation Institute of Maintenance, focusing on aviation mechanics. So, by the year 2025, both brothers had just 11 months remaining in their respective programs, and aspired to establish their own businesses upon graduation. But as well as their careers, they also had a strong passion for travel, and had made plans to visit Boston to see friends and explore new opportunities. However, just as they were preparing to embark on this new adventure, an event would take place that would change the lives of their family forever, when they would mysteriously disappear on that fateful day in March. On Friday the 7th of March, Qaadir and Naazir Lewis were preparing for an exciting trip. The 19-year-old twin brothers had plans to travel to Boston, where they would visit friends and explore the new opportunities that they had been speaking to their family about. At some point that day, they left their home in Lawrenceville ready to begin their journey, but unknown to their family at the time, they would never make it to their destination. Hours passed, and as night fell, their loved ones expected to hear from them, perhaps a message confirming that they had arrived safely. But as the minutes turned into hours, and then into an entire night without a word, the unease began to settle in. The next morning, their family tried reaching them yet again, but their phones went straight to voicemail. But still, they remained hopeful, thinking that maybe the twins were just simply caught up in their travels or had forgotten to check in. However, later that very same day, a devastating discovery would be made over 80 miles away from their home, which would unfortunately change everything in an instant. On Saturday the 8th of March, a group of hikers had made their way up the rugged trails of Bell Mountain in Hiawassee, Georgia, a popular but remote scenic spot known for its breathtaking views. The day was supposed to be like any other, a peaceful trek through the mountains. But instead, they would stumble upon a horrific and inexplicable scene. Lying motionless near the summit were the bodies of 2 young men, both suffering from gunshot wounds. Their belongings were scattered around them, and it was immediately clear that something had gone terribly wrong. So, shocked and unsettled, the hikers quickly dialed 911, their voices filled with panic as they relayed the disturbing discovery to emergency dispatchers. Within minutes, the town's county sheriff's office and emergency responders were on their way, but when authorities arrived at the scene, they confirmed the worst. Both young men were deceased. It didn't take long for them to identify the victims as Qaadir and Naazir Lewis, the 19-year-old twin brothers from Lawrenceville who had been missing for nearly 24 hours. Word of their deaths spread quickly, and soon their family was notified of the tragic news, a moment that would shatter their lives forever. But as investigators began piecing together what happened, theories started forming almost immediately. Officials suggested that the scene pointed toward a murder-suicide, a claim that left their family in utter disbelief. To those who knew Qaadir and Naazir, this explanation made no sense. They were inseparable, excited about their future, and had just been preparing for a trip to Boston. They also had no known ties to Bell Mountain or any history of violence toward one another. So, determined to uncover the truth, the investigation progressed, and more questions began to emerge, such as why had the twins ended up on Bell Mountain over 100 miles away from their intended destination? And perhaps most disturbingly, was someone else responsible for their deaths? But just as police drew closer to concluding the case as nothing more than a murder-suicide, there would be a sudden update in the investigation that would seemingly change everything once again. On Thursday the 21st of March, nearly 2 weeks on from the tragic discovery of Qaadir and Naazir Lewis, the case would take an unexpected turn. The town's county sheriff's office announced the arrest of a volunteer firefighter named Scott Curlin, who had been charged with dissemination of confidential police information. According to the authorities, he had illegally leaked graphic crime scene photos of the deceased twins, an act that not only disrespected the victims but also deeply traumatized their grieving family. The charges against Scott Curlin then sparked immediate outrage, as many questioned how such sensitive images had been allowed to spread. The public was already skeptical of the investigation, and this breach of protocol only fueled suspicions of mishandling and possible corruption. As news of the firefighter's arrest spread, media coverage of the case intensified. What had originally been a local Georgia tragedy quickly became a national talking point, with journalists, activists, and true crime communities dissecting every single detail of the case. Social media platforms were soon flooded with theories and speculation. Was this breach simply a reckless act, or did it reveal something more sinister about the investigation? Some critics even questioned whether law enforcement was truly committed to uncovering the truth, or if the case was being intentionally mishandled. The family of Qaadir and Naazir, still in the midst of their grief, demanded answers. They had already rejected the initial murder-suicide theory, and now with an officer of the fire department involved in misconduct, their faith in the investigation was further shattered. Meanwhile, activists and community leaders began calling for transparency, urging law enforcement to provide clearer evidence supporting their conclusions. But despite this massive public outcry, officials have yet to release concrete details about what truly happened on Bell Mountain that day. And so, as weeks pass with no new updates, the questions remain. What really happened to Qaadir and Naazir Lewis? And most importantly, is there something authorities aren't telling us? Now, unfortunately, as far as the official investigation goes, this is all we know for now. But despite the rather bleak circumstances, the Lewis family are still holding out hope that they will one day get the answers that they need, as the case continues to be investigated by the police, as well as numerous online sources who continue to discuss the case as well. So based on this, it will hopefully only be a matter of time before the truth is revealed, and Qaadir and Naazir's family can put their loved ones to rest with closure on the situation. However, given that this case is still unsolved after 4 weeks, alongside the controversial details that surround it, I can't help but feel that the likelihood of an accurate resolution is only growing weaker as the days go by. So with that, let's get into some of the potential theories. Now, just before I get into the theories themselves, I first wanted to clarify that the following information has not been verified by law enforcement or the family of Qaadir Naazir Lewis. These are simply my own personal views based on the details surrounding the case, as well as talking points from people online. But given the suspicious circumstances of their deaths, I believe we have to consider the possibility that racial discrimination may have played a role in what happened to the twins on Bell Mountain. If you've been following my channel, then you know that I've covered numerous cases of black men who have mysteriously died or gone missing in predominantly white rural areas. Cases that often seem to lack proper investigation, leaving families with more questions than answers. And when we take a deeper look at Towns County, Georgia, we see a troubling pattern. Historically, this region has been linked to Sundown Town culture, where black people were systematically excluded and even threatened if they remained in certain areas after dark. Though times have changed, racial tensions still linger in many parts of rural Georgia, raising an important question. Could Qaadir and Naazir have been targeted simply for being black men in the wrong place at the wrong time? Adding to this suspicion, the area where they were found, Bell Mountain, is known for being isolated, with very little foot traffic aside from locals and tourists. So the fact that they ended up there hours away from their home in Lawrenceville is already unusual. But to make matters even stranger, a firefighter was also charged with leaking their crime scene photos, a disturbing act that only adds to the sense of cover-up and corruption. If their deaths were truly an open and shut case, why would someone risk their career to leak evidence? Was this meant to send a message, or could it have been a way to control the narrative before too many people started asking questions? While authorities have suggested a possible murder-suicide, the family has rejected this claim outright, insisting that the brothers were not suicidal and had no history of violence toward one another. So, if they are correct, that would mean we are looking at a double homicide, one that for some reason authorities don't seem too eager to solve. But before I get too carried away, I must remind you that this is only a theory, and without clear evidence we have to be careful before jumping to any conclusions. However, given the history of racial violence in small southern towns, I can't help but wonder if Qaadir Naazir Lewis unknowingly walked into danger that day, and if so, is someone being protected at their expense? The term Sundown Town refers to communities that historically excluded non-white individuals, particularly African Americans, from residing or remaining in town after dark, often through discriminatory laws, intimidation, or even violence. These practices were prevalent in various parts of the United States, including Georgia. Hiawassee, located in Towns County, has a demographic composition that is predominantly white. According to the 2020 census, the racial makeup of Hiawassee was approximately 92.4% white and only 0.4% black or African American. This lack of racial diversity raises questions about the town's historical and current inclusivity. But to add further fuel to the fire, the History of Social Justice Project's database indicates that Towns County, where Hiawassee is located, was surely a sundown town in the past, with the peak of exclusionary practices around 1910. This database also suggests that it is probably still a sundown town today, at least to some degree. Now, while there are no explicit records of Hiawassee enforcing sundown policies through ordinances or posted signs, the demographic data and historical context definitely suggests a legacy of racial exclusion. So in conclusion, while Hiawassee's current status as a sundown town cannot be definitively confirmed, historical evidence and demographic patterns suggest a legacy of racial exclusion. So in my opinion, there is every chance that these young men were lured out to the remote area before having their lives taken at the hands of a local resident. However, once again, before I get too carried away, I must remind you that this is only a theory, and the so-called professionals who are looking after this case still stand by their initial claim that the likely explanation is that the case was a murder-suicide. So in order to stay unbiased, could there be any weight to this theory, or is somebody just trying to cover up the truth? Well, at first glance, the circumstances surrounding their deaths do seem suspicious. Two brothers, both young and full of potential, suddenly vanish, only to be found lifeless on a remote mountain with no clear signs of a third party's involvement. So I guess you could say I somewhat understand why the police may have come to this conclusion. However, based on the evidence, I would say that while this theory is possible, there are several factors that cast extreme doubt upon it. From my research, there is no public record of either brother suffering from severe mental health issues that could have led to such an extreme act. They were described as intelligent, driven, and deeply connected, with absolutely no history of violence between them. Furthermore, the lack of information being released by the authorities makes it difficult to determine if one brother harmed the other before ending their own life. After all, if this was a premeditated act, where is the hard evidence pointing to that conclusion? And perhaps the biggest hole in this theory is the simple fact that their family and friends never saw any warning signs. No cryptic messages, no concerning behaviour before the trip, nothing that would indicate they were planning something so devastating. So while some may argue that this could have been a case of murder-suicide, in my opinion, the details remain murky at best, and until further evidence comes to light, it seems just as likely to me that there is another explanation for their tragic deaths. Whether that involves foul play, an accident, or something else entirely, one thing is for certain: there are still so many unanswered questions in this case. So we have to do everything we can to help keep their story in the spotlight, to ensure that their family get the answers that they deserve. Anyway, on that note, I think I'll leave this video here. But as always, if you have any other theories of your own which you think may help explain what really happened to Qaadir and Naazir Lewis, please leave your ideas in the comments down below and I'll do my best to get back to you. But until next time, thank you so much for watching, and make sure to subscribe to the channel for updates on this case. Also, if you found the story interesting, feel free to check out the video on screen now, which explores the modern day sundown towns of America and the cases that continue to go unsolved to this day.